Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. I'm doing a podcast today with Brendan Hilder. Brendan, this is the second podcast you've done with us, isn't it?
Yep, it certainly is.
Yep. So now Brendan and I have worked together a couple of times in the past for two of our clients. Both of them were engineering services businesses, so field-based engineers type companies. One of them extremely large and one of them pretty large at a few hundred million. In terms of career, Brendan's career is business analysis. So Brendan's a career senior business analyst. He's worked for a multitude of organizations. He's truly industry agnostic, so brings best practice from multiple industries. And he's come to talk to us today about a particular subject that we've agreed beforehand, which is about requirement gathering. But before we get into that, why don't you introduce yourself, Brendan, and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yep, sure. I'm a business analyst, as you say, career business analyst. That's what I enjoy doing. Tried a couple of project management over the years, but business analysis is me. And I've been in it about 30 years now, worked in various industries. As you can hear by my accent, I'm Australian. I came here 25 years ago for 6 weeks, and I've tended to stay in the UK, had some great opportunities here and learnt a lot and honed my skills of business analysis in the UK.
Great, thank you for that. In terms of the conversation then, I know this is a topic that you really enjoy talking about, and it's a topic that I talk about a lot, given the fact that a lot of our work, I was going to say the majority, certainly a lot of our work is around transformation. In terms of doing any kind of transformation, we've got to understand what the requirement is and we've got to gather that requirement. I've seen that done really well in the past and I've seen that done really bad in the past. And, that's the area that we're going to talk about today. And why don't you give people a bit of an understanding of how much you've been involved in requirement gathering?
Yeah, requirements gathering is my bread and butter. As a business analyst. So if you like, you've got the as is, which we spoke about in the previous podcast.
Yeah.
And then we move to the what it is we want, and then we move to how we should do it. And too often, so it's what, not how. And that's documenting it in a way that is understandable by the business, because often requirements, people don't see necessarily the value of them. But if we rush to a solution, we can get a solution that is neither fit for purpose, or it's sort of fit for purpose, or it wasn't what we wanted because we haven't got the requirements and we've got nothing to measure it against. So there the business get naturally frustrated by not getting what they thought they were getting, but that's because they didn't ask for it. And we didn't help them to ask for it. And we've got to help the business sort of slow them down a bit rather than rushing to a solution, because that's the nice stuff. Let's step back and understand what it is you want. And sometimes by documenting what it is they want, it helps them understand, what we thought was going to cost X is going to cost Y.
Yes.
Or there's not a solution out there. Or what we were going to buy. I've been in many places where you go in, they say, right, we bought this solution. We just want you to do the requirements. So you're doing them reverse. And then when you hand those requirements over to the vendor that they've chosen, the vendor will say, oh, we don't do that, don't do that. We do that. That will do eventually. That will never do, which the business will then go, oh, we bought a pup. Or the business says they've budgeted X, and you ask them how they budgeted that. Well, we just picked a number out of the sky, which is fine. But then I had a case where they'd budgeted 100,000. By the time we documented the requirements, we realised it was going to be 2.5 million. Now that business thanked me because they said, all we've spent money, we all we spent money on is actually you coming in and documenting the requirements.
Yeah.
Whereas normally we would spend $100,000 and then we say, oh, we need some more money. You said before you know it, you're at $500,000-600,000. And what do? You've spent £600,000 and you can't move forward because you haven't got 2.5 million. It's just not worth it. So that's why requirements are really important, and to help them measure what it is they want. So that's at a very high level. And then if you go down to often people talk about requirements, but they don't actually understand what it is.
Yes.
And the requirement, and okay, where is the requirement? Well, we haven't actually documented, or we've documented it sort of. But by documenting what the requirement is and then what the acceptance criteria for that requirement is, you help the business really get to a lower level of what they want. And it doesn't take that much time. Used to take longer. That's one thing where AI has helped me, particularly ChatGPT, because normally you'd get your high level requirements and then go talk to the business about the acceptance criteria. With ChatGPT, it helps me get some of that acceptance criteria, and rather than putting a blank sheet in front of the business, put something that they can throw darts at.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the basic principle with most things like this is it's easier to edit something than what it is to create something.
Yeah.
So if you're going to the board with something like that, like you said, to throw darts at, what that really means is that they can go there and they can, no, I definitely don't want that, or I definitely don't want this. Okay, then you get into the conversation of really, what do you want? What's capability?
Exactly. And I had an example where I got told by the business that they wanted this certain thing. And I said, who wants that? And they said, the MD wants it. So I put, because you always assign to a requirement who wants it, so that, because they're the one who own it. So I went and I spoke to the MD. I said, right, here's your requirement. So you want? He goes, I don't want that one. He said, I know why they want it, but it would send us broke if we did it.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So that was taken out. But yeah, so by giving him something and documenting it, otherwise it probably would have just got built, and then later on we would have had you're building what, stop building it, and expense would have been incurred. And there's a saying, and I've never been able to find this written anywhere. There's a saying: if it costs £1 to fix it at the requirement stage, it will cost you £100 to fix it at implementation stage.
Yes.
So that's why requirements are so important. What it is you want, what are the business rules, what's the acceptance criteria for it, and they will then so some of the requirements will come out of the processes, the as is processes. Some of them will come out of talking to people. Some of them will come out of you've got to aid them sometimes and say, have you thought about this? And they'll go, oh no, I hadn't thought about that. So you've then got those requirements, which you can take your as is processes and work out how to put them into 2B processes.
Yes.
So that's, and so, okay, so I'm mapping this requirement to this process, if you like.
Yeah.
And that helps the business, and where it really helps the business is if they're going out to third-party vendors, they can present this to the third-party vendor and say, this is what we want. What can you do? What can't you do? And if they can't do stuff, that's okay, because it is a wish list, but it's best to know up front that they can't do it, or there's a cost impact to it.
Yeah, first of all, requirements gathering should be part of the RFP. So, request for price. But before that, when you're having the discussions with which potential vendors are you going to send the RFP to, this is the bit where you need the requirement. You know, I've seen it so many times where, business has gone out to a credible, let's say, consultancy or SI or something like that, or vendor. Vendor, we see this quite a lot, where they have the initial discussion with them, and the vendor, of course, is yes. It's not checked against the requirements more formally. And then when it comes to the build, or when it comes to the implementation, we can't do that, or that's not live yet.
Or it wasn't documented,
Yeah, and then it's a change request if a best case scenario.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's where I call it the ka-ching moment, because that's where they can jack up their price. But if you've way back when said this is what we want, they're costing it. And I've
yeah,
had examples where where people have said, you didn't ask for that, and I've been able to go back to the requirement and say, actually, yes, we did. I've had other
yeah,
examples where they said you didn't ask for that, and I went back and no, I didn't. So
yeah,
you can miss requirements, but you've got to lessen them as much as you can. That sort of guff, if you like, where so yeah, people talk about functional and non-functional requirements, but within those areas, you've got some others which are conscious requirements. So you know that you want this function.
yeah,
Unconscious requirements, you want it, but you don't document it. And if you don't document it, it may not happen
yeah,
because you just thought, oh, that's how it works. And then the undreamt of requirements is where, oh, I didn't even realize, I didn't ask for that because I didn't think it was possible or I hadn't thought of that. So that's where a business analyst should help them
yeah,
um, document that. And rather than just be a note taker, aid them in their thinking and where they could be. And um, many years ago, I worked for a company and it was a people and process thing rather than technology. And I said, would you like a tannoy through the area? And she went, no, we don't have one in the old area. And I was, okay. I said, you sure? She goes, I'll put it in. She came to me once we were implemented. She goes, that is the best thing you've implemented. She said, I didn't even know I wanted it, but she said, I love it. So simple as that. So that's, if
yeah.
you've got your conscious, your unconscious, your undreamt of within those requirements, functional and non-functional.
Yeah, I think the element of understanding requirements and like you said, it's the what
Yeah.
before the how. What it stops is it stops all the pitfalls that we see towards the end of a transformation program. You managed to cut out a lot of those. I was talking to a client once, and he said he was talking about it was a management consultancy he was working with regard to the transformation. And he said, I've got this report and it's a great report and it genuinely is. And they're a good management consultancy. And he said, the problem is it's the correct answer to the wrong question.
Yes.
And he said, I asked the wrong question. And it wasn't until we got the requirements gathering done that I realized that I'd asked the wrong question and I had to go back and ask the right question. And I've always remembered that.
Yeah, that is so very easy to do. I worked with one colleague. I'd go and ask him a question and he'd give me an answer. I'd go, I've asked the wrong question, haven't I? And
Yeah.
he'd just smile at me and go, yes, but I'll let you know when you get it right. Frustrating at the time, but it really taught me with that particular person, I had to think about my question
Yeah.
and get it right. So,
Well, this is when hiring a professional business analyst really comes into its own because you know the questions to ask the people to gather the requirements to then arm the decision maker who's speaking to the vendors, the SIs, the management consultants, and so forth, and arming them with the right questions to ask.
yeah, exactly. And here is the, even if you've decided on a vendor, let's say you've decided on a vendor and I come in late and do the requirements, just hand them to the vendor and say, what of this can you do?
Yeah.
And if they can't do some of the stuff, at least and you don't get that surprise at the end where the frustration is from, I thought we were getting X, but we're getting Y.
Yeah, and then you get low user acceptance and all that type of stuff. I think you raise a good point actually. So I'll ask you this question sort of a little bit separately. If I'm a client and I'm already going through a transformation program or an ERP implementation or people process systems, if I'm doing something and I'm halfway through and I'm getting things like change requests, I'm getting things like feedback from the business saying that's not quite what we asked for. All these little indicators that tell me that something's not quite right. Can I bring in someone like you to look at the requirements from scratch again and then cross-check that against what we're getting?
Yeah, absolutely, you can. It's not as easy as bringing me in at the first part, but I can come
Of
in
course,
later.
yeah, of course.
I can come in later, absolutely, and have a look and just understand the requirements. Because that's the other thing with requirements. Often they're written, but they're not in a format that is digestible to the business.
Yeah,
The business doesn't always want to read Excel spreadsheets and this mapping to this mapping. Um, I always, with requirements, tend to put them in a Word document, have my high level requirement, who wants it, why they want it, because the why is important as well, because that can
of
often be the
course.
real requirement, and
Yeah,
the acceptance criteria, but put that in a tabular format that the business can read and tick it off and say, yeah, that's digestible to me. But then when I'm going out to a vendor, I may well put it into a spreadsheet because it's easier for them to come back and say, yeah, we can do that. No, we can't do it, or we can do half of that.
yeah.
So
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think what I've also found, to be fair to, third parties, whenever I've been working with clients who are working with vendors, in the vast majority of cases, the vendors are very, very honest when it comes to explaining what they can do. If it's against a requirement set, they'll say yes or no, or they'll say not yet, or something like that.
absolutely. But if you don't ask them, they're going to assume that you know that,
Yes, and
and
you're going to
that's all
assume
it is.
that it's utopia, that it's the silver bullet that's going to solve everything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's okay. Like it's okay if they can't do it, as long as you know it. And sometimes, if you write requirements for a project, that vendor may only be satisfying some of the requirements. Other
yeah,
requirements may be being satisfied internally or however by another vendor. So that's good too, because if you've got two or three vendors, you know, well, that vendor is delivering requirements A, B, and C. That vendor is delivering some of the acceptance criteria of that, and they're delivering D, E, and F. And that's
yeah.
okay because you don't have your wires, you uncross your wires before they're crossed.
Yes. Well, it's like anything else. I'll speak to a client, and they'll all say the same thing to me, which is, Mark, no surprises.
Yeah,
And if you look at requirements gathering done right in the way that you've been explaining, then that's going to minimize the surprises. And I think that's going to be music to everyone's ears.
it is. You've got to be sort of keep in the back of your mind. You've still got to deliver.
Yeah,
Requirements are a means to an end. They're not an end in themselves.
yeah. It's a
And
good place to start.
they're the place to start, but they're not. You don't need perfection in requirements. You need adequate coverage,
Yeah.
but because the business still needs to process and move ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, if we look at the question that we talked about, requirement gathering and the what before the how, I think what you've done is given everyone a really good understanding of why requirement gathering is important,
Mhm.
what's involved in it, some of the pitfalls to avoid. And I think one of the big takeaways for me is, even if you're halfway through a program, if something's starting to happen where you're getting a couple of surprises, it might be time to go back in, have an independent person look at the requirement gathering. It's non-intrusive to do that. And what you'll do is you'll get a really good idea of what's coming next, and that
Yeah,
starts to minimize the surprises.
absolutely, and that's all you want to do.
Yeah,
Um,
brilliant. Brendan, thank you very much for your time, sir. I think this has been really
Thanks, mate.
good, and I've enjoyed speaking with you again.
All right, cheers.
Thanks.